The phone call came while I was bleeding out in the ICU, my ribs crushed, my face so swollen I could barely see through the slits where my eyes used to be. I could taste blood in my mouth as I whispered into the phone, my voice barely audible over the beeping machines keeping me alive. "Dad, please. I was in an accident. I'm at Northwestern Memorial. I need you." There was a pause, long enough for hope to flicker in my chest. Then his voice came through, cold and sharp as a blade. "You take care of it yourself. You've always been a mistake. Don't ever call this number again." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my trembling hand, the dial tone buzzing like wasps in my ear. The nurse who had been adjusting my IV looked away, her face flushed with secondhand shame. 20 minutes later, she returned with paperwork. "Your father was here," she said quietly. "He signed the financial responsibility waiver and left." He had been in the building. He had walked into this hospital, signed a form to make sure he wouldn't pay a single cent for my care, and walked out without even looking at me. That was the moment I should have died inside, but I didn't know yet that I was already dead, that I had been dead for 27 years. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever questioned your own worth because someone treated you like you were nothing, stay with me. This story gets darker before it gets better, but I promise you, it gets better. And if this resonates with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and drop a comment below telling me about a time you had to choose yourself over someone else's cruelty. Your story matters. Let me take you back to the beginning, or at least, to what I thought was the beginning. My name was Jenna Riley. At least, that's what I believed for 27 years. I grew up in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago with a man I called father, though he never once called me daughter. Rick Riley was a mechanic with grease permanently embedded under his fingernails, and bourbon always on his breath by 7 p.m. He was a man of few words, and most of those words were sharp enough to draw blood. I was 8 years old the first time I realized other kids had fathers who were different. It was during parent-teacher conferences. I'd been so excited, clutching my report card with 3 A's and 2 B's, thinking maybe this would be the thing that made him proud. I waited by the window for 2 hours, watching other parents arrive, watching my teacher glance at the clock with increasing concern. He never showed. When I got home, he was on the couch watching TV, a beer in his hand. "You didn't come," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He didn't even look at me. Had work. But it was at 6. The shop closes at 5. I said I had work. His tone made it clear the conversation was over. I stood there for a moment, the report card crumpling in my sweaty hand, before retreating to my room. I never asked him to come to anything again. I learned early not to ask for things. Not for new shoes, when mine had holes and my toes pressed against the front. Not for help with homework when I couldn't understand fractions. Not for a hug when I scraped my knee falling off my bike. I learned to be small, to be quiet, to be grateful for the roof over my head even when that roof leaked every time it rained, and I had to strategically place buckets around my bedroom to catch the drips. I learned that love was something other kids got, something I apparently had to earn but never could, no matter how hard I tried. The apartment was always cold in winter. Rick refused to turn the heat above 60 degrees. "You want it warmer, put on a sweater," he'd grunt. I slept in layers, sometimes 3 shirts and 2 pairs of socks, my breath visible in the air when I woke up. The refrigerator was never full. Meals were whatever I could cobble together from the basics he'd buy in bulk. Ramen noodles, white bread, peanut butter that was more oil than peanuts. On my 10th birthday, I made myself a sandwich and stuck a match in it, singing happy birthday to myself in a whisper so he wouldn't hear from the other room. I worked my first job at 14, lying about my age to wash dishes at Rosie's Diner 6 blocks from our apartment. The owner, a woman named Carmen with kind eyes and flour always dusting her apron, knew I was lying but hired me anyway. I think she felt sorry for me. I came home every night smelling like grease and dish soap in desperation, my hands red and wrinkled from the hot water. I'd hand Rick half my paycheck every Friday, placing the cash on the table next to his dinner plate. He'd take it without looking at me, without saying thank you, just fold it and shove it in his wallet as if it was his due. As if I owed him for the privilege of existing in his space. "Rick, I was thinking maybe I could keep a little more this week," I said once, when I was 15. "There's a field trip at school and—" "You think this place pays for itself?" he interrupted, not looking up from his plate. "You think food and rent are free?" "No," I just thought. "You don't think. You contribute. That's how this works." I never asked again. I told myself he was teaching me responsibility. I told myself he was preparing me for the real world. I told myself a lot of lies in those days because the truth, that my own father saw me as nothing more than a financial asset, was too painful to acknowledge. By the time I was 16, I was working 30 hours a week on top of school. My grades slipped. I fell asleep in class. Teachers expressed concern, asked if everything was okay at home. I lied and said everything was fine. What else could I say? That I was exhausted because I was supporting a grown man who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my existence? That I went to bed hungry most nights because I gave him most of my paycheck, and he spent it on cigarettes and beer instead of groceries? Senior year, I applied to colleges. Community colleges, state schools, anywhere that might give me a scholarship. I got accepted to a few programs and was offered partial financial aid, but it wasn't enough. I needed Rick to fill out the FAFSA, to provide his tax information. I need you to sign these, I said one evening, setting the papers in front of him with a pen, for college financial aid. He glanced at them, then back at the TV. College, that's funny. I'm serious. I got accepted to. You gonna pay for it with what? He finally looked at me, his eyes cold. You can barely cover your share of the rent. That's why I need the financial aid. These forms. I'm not signing anything. You want to waste your time and money on college, that's your problem. But you're not getting a dime from me, and I'm not putting my name on any government paperwork. My throat tightened. Please, this is my chance to. To what? Think you're better than me? He stood up, his chair scraping against the linoleum. You're not special, Jenna. You're not going anywhere. You're just like your mother, whoever the hell she was, probably dead in a ditch somewhere because she couldn't handle reality either. He'd never mentioned my mother before. The cruelty of it, the casual viciousness, hit me like a punch. I grabbed the papers and left the room before he could see me cry. I enrolled in community college anyway, taking out loans in my own name, working full-time at a second job, at a grocery store, to cover tuition. By the time I was 18, I was working 2 jobs and taking a full course load. I lived on 3 hours of sleep and coffee that tasted like battery acid. Rick never asked how I was doing, never showed up to anything, never acknowledged that I existed unless he needed something. When I graduated with my associate degree 2 years later, I walked across that stage alone. I scanned the audience beforehand, even though I knew he wouldn't come. I'd mentioned it to him 3 times, even wrote the date on the calendar hanging in the kitchen. The seat I'd hoped he might occupy stayed empty. I watched other graduates hug their families afterward, saw mothers crying with pride, fathers taking pictures, siblings holding flowers. I stood by myself in my rented cap and gown, diploma in hand, and felt the emptiness like a physical weight crushing my chest. The woman next to me, a grandmother with gray hair and a warm smile, noticed me standing alone. "Where's your family, honey?" she asked. "Working." I lied, because it was easier than the truth. She hugged me anyway. A stranger's arms around me, and I nearly broke down right there in the parking lot. I moved out when I was 22, finally scraping together enough for a security deposit on a studio apartment in a building where the elevator only worked half the time and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbors' conversations. It was in a rougher neighborhood than I would have liked, but it was mine. I thought distance would help. I thought maybe if I wasn't under his roof, constantly disappointing him just by existing, things might change. Maybe he'd realize he missed me. Maybe he'd call and ask how I was. They didn't. He never called, never texted, never checked if I was alive or dead. But I kept trying. God help me, I kept trying. I'd call him on his birthday every year. "Happy birthday, Rick," I'd say when he answered. "Yeah." That was it. Just yeah. Then silence until I filled it with nervous chatter about my life that he clearly didn't care about. On Father's Day, I'd call and the conversation went exactly the same way. "Happy Father's Day, I was thinking maybe we could get lunch sometime." "Busy." "Okay, well, maybe next week?" "I'll let you know." He never did. On Christmas I'd try again, hope flickering stupidly in my chest despite everything. "Merry Christmas. I have a present for you if you want to." "Don't need anything?" Then he'd hang up. Sometimes he wouldn't answer at all. I'd leave voicemails that went unreturned. "Hey, it's me. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Call me back when you get a chance." He never got a chance. I'd send texts that turned blue and stayed blue, unread, unanswered. "Thinking of you. Hope you're well. Miss you." Each message felt like shouting into a void. I worked my way up to a decent job as an administrative assistant at a law firm downtown. Anderson and Price. a mid-sized firm that handled corporate litigation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. I had health insurance for the first time in my life, a 401k I contributed to religiously, a desk with a view of the street where I could watch the world go by during my lunch break. I had coworkers who invited me to happy hour, who asked about my weekend, who remembered my birthday, and surprised me with a card signed by everyone in the office. Sarah from accounting became something like a friend. We'd get coffee together, complain about difficult clients, talk about our lives. I should have been content. I had more than I'd ever had growing up. I was safe. I was independent. But there was always this hollow space inside me, this question I couldn't answer, that kept me up at night staring at my ceiling. Why wasn't I enough? What was so fundamentally wrong with me that my own father couldn't love me? I'd see fathers and daughters together in the coffee shop, laughing and talking easily, and I'd feel something twist painfully in my chest. I'd wonder what I'd done, what I'd failed to be, that made me so unworthy of even basic affection. I went to therapy for 6 months when I was 25. The therapist, Dr. Hernandez, a patient woman in her 50s, tried to help me understand that Rick's failure to love me wasn't my fault. You can't earn love from someone who's incapable of giving it, she'd say. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally are two different things. I stopped going eventually. It felt like picking at a wound that would never heal. The night of the accident, I had been driving home from a particularly brutal day at work. One of the senior partners had screamed at me for 20 minutes because I'd supposedly misfiled a document, even though I hadn't. I'd stood there and taken it, apologizing for something I didn't do, because that's what I'd learned to do. Take the blame, absorb the anger, make myself smaller. The rain was coming down in sheets, the kind of rain that turns Chicago streets into rivers. My windshield wipers were fighting a losing battle. I was stopped at a red light on Michigan Avenue, my hands gripping the steering wheel, when I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. They were coming too fast, not slowing down. I had just enough time to think no before the world exploded. Metal screaming, glass shattering, my body thrown forward and then back, the seatbelt catching me but not enough. Pain, sudden and overwhelming, everywhere at once. The taste of blood, the smell of gasoline and burning rubber, the sound of horns and sirens and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I don't remember the ambulance ride. I remember waking up in the ICU, a doctor with kind eyes telling me I was lucky to be alive. Broken ribs, collapsed lung, concussion, lacerations all over my face and arms. Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt alone. So desperately, crushingly alone. That's when I made the call to Rick. That's when he told me I was a mistake and hung up on me. That's when the nurse told me he'd been there and left. That's when I thought I'd hit rock bottom. I had no idea how much further I could fall. 2 days later, I was moved out of the ICU to a regular room. I was still in pain, still barely able to move without help, but the doctors said I was stable. I was staring at the ceiling, counting the tiles and wondering how I was going to pay the hospital bills when 2 people in dark suits walked into my room. They showed me badges. FBI. My first thought was that I'd done something wrong. Some paperwork error at the law firm had spiraled into a federal investigation, and somehow it was my fault. That's how trained I was to assume blame. Jenna Riley? The woman asked. She was in her 40s, with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Yes, I whispered, my throat still raw from the breathing tube they'd had down it. I'm Special Agent Chen, and this is Special Agent Torres. We need to talk to you about your identity. I blinked at her, confused. My identity? Agent Torres pulled up a chair. He was younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that probably smiled easily under different circumstances. He wasn't smiling now. The accident you were in triggered a routine DNA collection. It's standard procedure for all major trauma cases in Illinois. Your sample was run through the national database. Okay, I said slowly. None of this made sense. Is that a problem? Agent Chen exchanged a glance with her partner. Your DNA matched a sample in our system, a sample that's been in our database for 27 years. The room tilted. Or maybe it was just my head. I don't understand. Jenna Riley doesn't exist. Agent Torres said gently, your social security number is fraudulent. Your birth certificate is forged. According to every legal record, you were never born. I couldn't breathe. The monitors started beeping faster. That's impossible. I have a driver's license. I have a job. You have documents created by someone who knew how to work the system. Agent Chen interrupted. But the DNA doesn't lie. You're not Jenna Riley. She paused, and in that pause, my entire world cracked open. You're Aria Davenport. The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head, which sent spikes of pain through my skull. I don't know who that is. 27 years ago, Aria Davenport was kidnapped from her family's estate in the Hamptons. She was 6 months old. The ransom was paid, $10 million, but Aria was never returned. The case went cold, until now. I couldn't process it. The words were English, but they didn't connect to anything real. You're saying I was kidnapped? We're saying you are the kidnapped child. You're the sole heir to the Davenport fortune. Your parents have been looking for you for nearly 3 decades. I laughed. It came out broken and bitter. My parents? I don't have parents. I have a man who just told me I'm a mistake and walked away while I was bleeding in a hospital bed. Rick Riley is not your father, Agent Chen said. He's your kidnapper. Or at least, he's the one who raised you. We're still piecing together the full story. The room was spinning now. I gripped the bed rails. This is insane. You've made a mistake. The DNA test must be wrong. We've run it 3 times, Agent Torres said. It's a 100% match. Aria, your real parents are Julian and Eleonora Davenport. They've already been contacted. They're flying here now. Real parents. The words echoed in my head. I had spent my entire life believing I wasn't wanted, that I was a burden, that something about me was inherently unlovable. And now these strangers were telling me that somewhere out there, I had a mother and father who had been searching for me, who had never given up hope. It should have felt like a miracle. It felt like drowning. I need you to leave, I said, my voice shaking. Please, I need you to leave. They left, but not before Agent Chen handed me her card and told me they'd be right outside if I needed anything. The moment the door closed, I started crying. Deep, wrenching sobs that tore at my broken ribs and made my whole body scream in agony. I cried for the child who'd been stolen. I cried for the girl who'd grown up thinking she was worthless. I cried for the woman lying in this hospital bed who had no idea who she really was. The nurses must have sedated me eventually, because the next thing I remember is waking up to find a woman standing at the foot of my bed. She was beautiful in that effortless way wealthy people are, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was crying, her hands pressed to her mouth, her whole body shaking. Aria, she whispered. Oh my God, my baby. Behind her stood a man in an expensive suit, tall and imposing with silver hair and eyes like ice. He didn't rush forward. He studied me with an intensity that made me want to hide under the covers. There was another person too, a younger man in his early 30s, arms crossed, face carefully blank. The woman, Eleonora, my mother, moved toward me. She collapsed into the chair beside my bed and reached for my hand. Her touch was gentle, tentative, as if I might shatter. I never stopped looking for you, she said through her tears. Not for a single day. I knew you were out there. I knew you'd come back to me. I didn't know what to say. This stranger was holding my hand and calling me her baby, and I felt nothing but overwhelming confusion and a strange sense of violation, as if my entire life had been a lie someone else wrote and I'd just been living in the margins. The man, Julian, finally spoke. His voice was deep and controlled. We'll need to verify everything, of course. More tests. But if you are Aria, and it certainly seems that you are, then you need to understand that your life is about to change drastically. He gestured toward the younger man. This is Ethan, your brother. He was born 2 years after you were taken. Ethan didn't move. He was looking at me like I was a problem to be solved, an equation that didn't add up. I'm sure you understand our caution, he said, his tone polite but cold. There have been others over the years, people claiming to be Aria, hoping to cash in. We've learned to be suspicious. Ethan, Eleonora snapped, but he continued. You show up right when Davenport Technologies is about to launch our biggest product line to date. The timing is convenient. Forgive me for not immediately accepting that you're my long-lost sister. I found my voice then. It came out stronger than I expected. I didn't show up. I was hit by a drunk driver. And I don't want anything from you. I don't even know you. I just want to understand why my entire life has been a lie. Julian's expression shifted slightly, something that might have been respect. Fair enough. But whether you want it or not, if you are Aria, you are part of this family. You are an heir to Davenport Technologies. You are entitled to everything that was stolen from you. I don't care about money, I said. Everyone cares about money, Ethan muttered. Not when you've spent your whole life with nothing, I shot back. Money doesn't fix what was taken from me. It doesn't give me back the childhood I should have had. It doesn't erase 27 years of feeling unwanted. Eleonora squeezed my hand tighter. You were wanted. You were so wanted. You were everything to us. Outside my hospital room, I could hear commotion, voices shouting questions, camera flashes going off. The story had leaked. Of course it had leaked. The lost Davenport heiress, returned from the dead. It was media gold. Julian's jaw tightened. We need to move you. This hospital isn't secure enough. I'm having you transferred to a private facility. You can't just move me, I protested. Yes, I can, he said, and there was steel in his voice. You're my daughter, and I've already lost you once. I'm not going to lose you to some media circus or, worse, to whoever took you in the first place. Rick Riley is still out there, and we don't know if he's working alone. The thought of Rick, of Silas Crane, his real name as I'd later learn, sent ice through my veins. He had raised me. He had looked at me every day for 27 years, knowing I wasn't his, knowing I'd been stolen from a family who loved me. He had let me believe I was worthless. He had taken my calls when I was dying and told me I was a mistake. What kind of monster does that? The transfer happened within hours. I was moved in the middle of the night to a private medical facility in Lake Forest, an upscale suburb north of Chicago. The room was more like a hotel suite than a hospital room, with actual art on the walls and a view of Lake Michigan. There were security guards posted outside my door. Everything felt surreal, like I'd fallen through a rabbit hole into someone else's life. Eleonora barely left my side for the first week. She talked constantly, filling in the gaps of the life I should have had. She told me about the day I was born, how I had a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead. She told me about my nursery, decorated in soft yellows and greens, about the mobile that played Brahms' lullaby, about how I'd love to be held while she walked around the garden. She told me about the day I was taken. They'd had a charity gala at the estate. Over 200 people. Someone had gotten past security, gotten into the nursery, and taken me right out of my crib while the party raged below. By the time they realized I was gone, the kidnapper was hours away. The ransom call came 3 days later. Julian paid immediately, no negotiation. The money was dropped as instructed, but I never came home. We hired every private investigator, every security firm, every person who claimed they could find you, Eleonora said, her voice breaking. Your father never gave up. He built an entire department within Davenport Technologies dedicated to finding missing children, hoping that somehow, some way, it would lead us back to you. Julian visited too, but his visits were different. He'd sit in the chair across from my bed, his laptop open, conducting business while keeping an eye on me. Sometimes he'd ask me questions about my life with Rick, and I could tell he was cataloging every detail, building a case in his mind. Ethan came once. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, that same suspicious look on his face. You know everyone's going to assume you're a fraud, right? He said. Even with the DNA. They'll say you're a con artist, that we're being taken for fools. You're going to make our lives hell. I didn't ask for any of this, I said quietly. No one ever does. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope you are real. My mother deserves to have her daughter back, but if you're playing us, I will make sure you regret it. The FBI investigation moved quickly once they knew who to look for. Rick Riley, Silas Crane, had disappeared. His apartment was abandoned, cleared out like he'd never existed. His trail went cold somewhere in Indiana. They found evidence, though. Forged documents. A safety deposit box with $50,000 in cash and a passport in another name. Records showing he'd worked for Davenport Technologies as head of security until 6 months before my kidnapping, when he'd been fired. That detail haunted me. He'd worked for my father. He'd had access to the estate, to the security systems, to everything. And when Julian had fired him for reasons that were still being investigated, he'd taken revenge in the most brutal way possible. He'd stolen me. 3 weeks after the accident, I was released from the medical facility. I wasn't going back to my apartment. Julian had already sent people to pack up my belongings and put them in storage. I was going to New York, to the Davenport estate, whether I wanted to or not. The private jet was my first taste of the life I'd been born into. Leather seats, a flight attendant who brought me sparkling water and crystal glasses, Eleonora chattering nervously about the house and the staff and all the things we'd do together. Julian worked on his laptop. Ethan wasn't there. He'd taken a commercial flight, making a point. The Davenport estate in the Hamptons was obscene. That's the only word for it. Sprawling grounds, a main house that looked like it belonged in a European palace, guest houses, tennis courts, a pool, a private beach. I stood in the circular driveway, my few possessions in a borrowed suitcase, and felt like an imposter. "Welcome home," Eleonora said, her eyes bright with tears. Home. The word felt foreign. This wasn't home. Home was a cramped apartment with thin walls and neighbors who fought at 2 a.m. Home was instant ramen and library books, and wondering if you'd make rent. This was a museum, a monument to wealth I couldn't comprehend. My room, my old nursery converted to a bedroom years ago in the hope I'd return, was bigger than my entire apartment had been. There was a walk-in closet already filled with clothes in my size, a bathroom with a tub big enough to swim in, a balcony overlooking the ocean. On the nightstand was a photo in a silver frame. A baby with dark hair and bright eyes, laughing at whoever was holding the camera. Me. That was me. Aria Davenport, before she became Jenna Riley, before she learned to be small and quiet and grateful for scraps. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at that photo for a long time. The media frenzy was relentless. I couldn't leave the estate without being swarmed. Helicopters flew overhead trying to get photos. Reporters camped outside the gates. Every detail of my life was dissected. They found my old teachers, my coworkers, people I'd barely known who were suddenly offering interviews about what I was like. Most of it was lies or exaggerations, but some of it was uncomfortably true. Julian hired a PR team to manage the narrative. I had to do a carefully staged interview with a major network, sitting in the estate's library with Eleonora beside me, answering sanitized questions about how I felt to be reunited with my family. I felt like a puppet. Every word had been rehearsed, approved. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the fairy tale. Lost princess returns home. Happily ever after. Except nothing about this was happy. I couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft. The room was too quiet. I'd spent my whole life falling asleep to the sounds of the city, sirens and traffic and neighbors. Here, there was only the distant sound of waves and my own thoughts, which were louder than any siren. I didn't know how to talk to Eleonora. She wanted to do everything together. Shopping trips where she'd buy me designer clothes I'd never wear. Spa days. Mother-daughter lunches at restaurants where a salad cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. She meant well, but every lavish gift, every expensive outing, felt like a reminder of the chasm between who I was and who she wanted me to be. Julian was easier in some ways. He didn't expect emotional intimacy. He gave me a Black American Express card with no limit and a suite of offices in Davenport Technologies headquarters in Manhattan. "You're an heir," he said. "You should understand the business, learn how it works." But when I asked him about Silas Crane, about why he'd been fired, Julian's face would close off. "That's in the past. Focus on your future." "My future is built on a lie," I said. "I deserve to know the truth." "When the time is right," was all he'd say. Ethan made his hostility clear. At family dinners, which were mandatory and awkward affairs in the formal dining room, with actual place settings and wine I couldn't pronounce, he'd make little digs. "Jenna, sorry, Aria, must be overwhelming to suddenly have more than one fork to choose from." Or, "Did you have staff where you grew up, or did you have to clean your own toilet?" After one particularly brutal dinner where he'd questioned whether I was really planning to learn about the business or just live off the family fortune, I cornered him in the hallway. "What is your problem with me?" I demanded. "I didn't choose this. I didn't ask to be kidnapped. I didn't ask to be found. I'm as lost as you are angry, so either help me or leave me alone." He looked at me for a long moment. "My problem is that my mother has spent my entire life mourning a ghost. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family photo, there's been this shadow hanging over us. You. The perfect daughter she lost. The one she really wanted. And now you're here, and you're not what she expected, and it's going to destroy her when she realizes you're never going to be the fantasy she's built up in her head." His words hit harder than I expected. I never asked to be anyone's fantasy. "No," he said quietly. "I don't suppose you did." He walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway of a house that would never feel like mine. I couldn't do this. I couldn't be Aria Davenport, heir to a fortune, daughter of people I didn't know, sister to a man who resented my existence. I was Jenna Riley, and Jenna Riley knew how to survive. She knew how to be alone. I started making plans to leave. I had money now, that ridiculous black card. I could go anywhere, Start over somewhere nobody knew about Davenport Technologies or kidnapped heiresses. Australia, maybe. Or Ireland. Somewhere far away from this gilded cage. But before I could act on those plans, everything changed again. I'd been at the estate for 6 weeks when the FBI came back. Agent Chen and Agent Torres showed up unannounced, their faces grim. Julian met with them in his study. I was supposed to stay out of it, but I'd learned the estate well enough to know where to stand to hear through the vent. "We've located Silas Crane," Agent Chen said. "He's in Detroit using the name Marcus Webb. But here's where it gets complicated. We've been investigating his background, and we found something you need to know." "What is it?" Julian's voice was tight. "Crane was your head of security for 8 years. We pulled all his employment records, including his termination file. The official reason for his firing was theft of company property. But when we dug deeper, we found something else. Crane claimed he discovered evidence of corporate espionage, that someone in your company was selling proprietary technology to a competitor. He brought it to you, and instead of investigating his claims, you fired him." Silence. "Then, Julian, that's not exactly how it happened." "Then tell us how it happened," Agent Torres said. "Crane was right. There was corporate espionage. But the person responsible was someone I couldn't touch without risking everything I'd built. I made a deal instead. I kept it quiet, and in exchange, the leak stopped. Crane didn't understand the bigger picture. He wanted justice. I wanted to protect my company. So yes, I fired him. I gave him a generous severance and told him to keep his mouth shut. I thought that was the end of it." "Who was the leak?" Agent Chen asked. Another pause. "Marcus Thorne. He was my partner at the time. We'd built Davenport Technologies together from nothing. But he was selling our research to overseas competitors, making side deals. When I confronted him, he threatened to take half the company in a legal battle that would have destroyed us. So I bought him out instead, paid him twice what his shares were worth to go away quietly." "And Crane thought you were protecting a traitor," Agent Torres said. "Crane didn't know the full story. So he took your daughter instead." Agent Chen's voice was flat. "He took your baby and raised her in poverty as revenge for you, protecting the man who betrayed you both." I stepped into the doorway. They all turned to look at me. "Is that true?" I asked Julian. My voice was shaking. "You fired him for discovering the truth? You chose money over justice?" Julian's face was stone. "I chose survival. If Thorne had fought me, if that battle had gone public, Davenport Technologies would have collapsed. Hundreds of people would have lost their jobs. Investors would have fled. Everything my father built, everything I'd worked for, would have been destroyed. I made the choice I thought was right. And it cost you your daughter," I said. "It cost me my life." "I know." For the first time since I'd met him, Julian Davenport looked broken. "I've known since the day you disappeared. I always suspected Crane had something to do with it, but I could never prove it. And by the time I was sure, you were gone. Vanished. Every lead went nowhere. Every investigator came up empty. I built an entire division of this company dedicated to finding missing children because I couldn't find my own child." "Did you ever think about turning yourself in?" I asked. "About telling the police what you suspected?" "Every day," he said, "but I had no proof, just suspicion. And if I was wrong, if I'd accused Crane without evidence, he could have sued me into oblivion. I made a choice, Arya. Maybe it was the wrong choice. I've had 27 years to second-guess it." Agent Chen cleared her throat. "We need to discuss next steps. Crane knows we're looking for him. When we make a move to arrest him, he's going to run. We need your family to be protected. We also need you," she looked at me, "to be prepared. This is going to trial. You're going to have to testify. It's going to be brutal." "I'll do whatever it takes," I said. "He took everything from me. I want him to pay for it." But Silas Crane wasn't done taking from me yet. 2 weeks later, I woke up to my phone buzzing with notifications. My heart sank. More media coverage, I assumed. Some new, invasive article about my life. But when I opened the news app, the headline made my blood run cold. "Ethan Davenport missing. Kidnapping suspected." I ran downstairs in my pajamas. The house was in chaos. Police were everywhere. Julian was on the phone, his face ashen. Eleonora was sobbing in the living room, surrounded by agents. I grabbed Agent Chen as she walked past. "What happened?" "Ethan didn't come home last night. His security detail found his car abandoned in Manhattan. There was blood on the driver's seat. We received a ransom demand an hour ago." "From Crane?" We believe so. He's demanding $20 million in safe passage out of the country. He says if we don't comply within 48 hours, Ethan dies. The room spun. Ethan, my brother who hated me, who blamed me for ruining his perfect family, was now in danger because of me, because Silas Crane couldn't let go of his revenge. I pulled Agent Chen aside. I need to talk to you privately. We went into Julian's study. I closed the door. Crane raised me for 27 years. I know him. I know how he thinks. I know his patterns, his habits, the way he operates. Let me help. Absolutely not, Agent Chen said. You're a victim in this case, not an agent. We can't put you in danger. Ethan is in danger because of me, because Crane hates my father and sees us as extensions of that hate. I can help you find him. How? I thought back to my childhood, to the rare times Rick, Silas, had shown any sign of humanity. He had a place. He never took me there, but I overheard him talking about it once on the phone. An old warehouse in Gary, Indiana. He said it was his insurance policy, his backup plan. I didn't understand what he meant then, but I do now. That's where he'd go. That's where he'd feel safe. Agent Torres came in. We've traced the ransom call. It bounced through multiple servers, but the last ping came from Northwest Indiana, Gary area. I looked at Agent Chen. Let me help. What followed was the most terrifying 72 hours of my life. The FBI mobilized a tactical team. I wasn't allowed anywhere near the operation, officially, but I gave them everything I could remember. Details about Silas's habits, the way he planned things, the way he thought. I remembered him talking about exits, always exits. He never went anywhere without knowing 3 ways out. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I paced the estate like a ghost, jumping every time my phone buzzed. Eleonora was sedated, barely conscious. Julian was a statue, making calls, coordinating with the FBI, refusing to show any emotion. On the second night, I couldn't take it anymore. I got in one of the estate's cars, a BMW that was probably worth more than my old apartment building, and I drove. I didn't have a destination. I just needed to move. I found myself in the city, in the neighborhood where I'd grown up. The old apartment building looked even more run down than I remembered. I parked across the street and stared up at the window that had been mine. A light was on. Someone else lived there now. Someone else was living the life I'd escaped. My phone rang. Unknown number. My hands shook as I answered. Jenna. His voice. Silas's voice. After all these weeks, hearing it again was like being thrown back in time. Where is he? I kept my voice steady. Where's Ethan? You always were smart. Too smart for your own good. I saw you on the news, standing there with your rich daddy and your perfect family. Did you tell them about me? About how I fed you, clothed you, kept a roof over your head for 27 years? You kidnapped me. You stole me from my family. You let me grow up thinking I was unwanted. I saved you, he snarled. I saved you from that family. You think Julian Davenport is some kind of saint? He's a coward. He threw me away to protect his dirty money. He chose his precious company over doing what was right. I was going to expose him, destroy him. But taking you, that was better. That was justice. You're insane. Maybe, but I kept you alive. I could have killed you 100 times. Could have left you on the side of the road, but I didn't. I raised you. And this is how you repay me? By helping them hunt me down? Where is Ethan? He laughed, bitter and cold. You want to know? Come find out. You know where I am. You always knew. You're smart, Jenna. You figured it out. The warehouse in Gary. Tick-tock. You've got until sunrise. Come alone, or the golden boy dies. The line went dead. I should have called Agent Chen immediately. I should have driven back to the estate and let the professionals handle it. But all I could think about was Ethan, tied up somewhere, bleeding maybe, dying because of a revenge plot that had started before either of us was born. I drove to Gary. It took 2 hours, and with every mile, I questioned what I was doing. This was stupid. This was suicide. Silas Crane had spent 27 years controlling my life. He'd manipulated me, lied to me, made me believe I was worthless. And now I was walking straight into his trap. But I'd spent my whole life being a victim. Being the girl who took the hits and stayed down. Not anymore. I found the warehouse just before dawn. It was exactly where I remembered, though I'd never consciously known I remembered. A massive old industrial building, abandoned for years, windows broken, graffiti covering every surface. I parked a block away and approached on foot. The door was open. Of course it was. He wanted me to come in. Inside, the warehouse was cavernous and dark. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. "Crane," I called out. "I'm here. Let Ethan go." A light flickered on in the back. I saw Ethan tied to a chair, tape over his mouth, blood dried on his temple. He was conscious, his eyes wide with panic when he saw me. He shook his head frantically, trying to warn me. "Right on time," Silas said, stepping out of the shadows. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner. His eyes had a wild quality that scared me more than the gun in his hand. Always were punctual. "Let him go. This is between you and me." "Oh, Jenna. It was never between you and me. It was always about him." He gestured toward Ethan. "About their family, their money, their perfect life. Do you know what Julian Davenport did to me? I worked for him for 8 years. I was loyal. I discovered his partner was selling company secrets, stealing from him. From all of us. And when I brought him the proof, he fired me. Called me paranoid. Gave me a severance check and told me to disappear. Because he was protecting the company. He was protecting a criminal. Marcus Thorne was bleeding Davenport Technologies dry, and Julian let him walk away with millions rather than face the scandal. I had a family to support. I had bills. He took everything from me, so I took something from him. I was a baby. You were leverage. You were supposed to make him hurt the way I hurt, but then the years went by, and you grew up, and I realized something. You were better off with me. Away from their toxic, fake world. I taught you to survive. I taught you to be strong. You think you'd have learned any of that in some mansion with servants. You taught me to hate myself," I said. "You taught me I wasn't worth loving. Every day of my childhood, you made me feel like a burden. You never called me your daughter. You never hugged me. You never told me I mattered. And when I was dying in that hospital, you told me I was a mistake." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or just recognition. I couldn't love you. If I loved you, it would have meant Julian won. He took everything from me. I couldn't let him take my revenge, too. I'm not revenge. I'm a person. And Ethan is a person. He has nothing to do with what Julian did to you. He's a Davenport. That's enough. Then shoot me instead. Let him go and shoot me. If I'm what this is really about, if I'm the one you want, then do it. He raised the gun, pointing it at my chest. "You'd die for him? For the brother who's done nothing but hate you?" I looked at Ethan. His eyes were streaming tears, his whole body shaking. He was terrified, but he was my brother. Blood, real blood, not just DNA, but something deeper. "Family. Yes," I said. "I would." Silas stared at me for a long moment. Then he lowered the gun slightly. "You really are stronger than I thought. You didn't make me strong, you made me a survivor. There's a difference." I heard it before Silas did. The faint sound of movement, of boots on concrete. The FBI had tracked my phone. They'd followed me. I'd counted on it. "Drop the weapon," Agent Chen's voice echoed through the warehouse. Lights blazed. Dozens of agents, all with guns drawn, surrounding us. Silas's face twisted. He raised the gun again, but this time toward his own head. "You're not taking me. I'm not going to rot in some cell." "Don't," I said. "Please. I need to understand why. Why you kept me. Why you raised me. Why you couldn't just let me go." His hand wavered. "Because you were mine," he said, and his voice broke. "I know I was a terrible father. I know I gave you nothing but pain. But for 27 years, you were mine. You were the only thing Marcus Thorne and Julian Davenport couldn't buy. And somewhere along the way, even though I couldn't show it, couldn't say it, you became the only thing that mattered. Then don't do this. Face what you did. Take responsibility. Like Julian did." He laughed bitterly. "No, I'm done." What happened next felt like slow motion. Silas turned the gun toward the agents. It was suicide by cop, a final act of revenge against a world that had beaten him down. The agents fired. Multiple shots, echoing like thunder. Silas Crane fell. I don't remember screaming, but I must have, because my throat was raw afterward. Agents rushed forward, checked his pulse. Agent Chen was already cutting Ethan free. I stood frozen, staring at the body of the man who'd raised me, the man who'd stolen my childhood, the man who'd just died without ever telling me he was sorry. Ethan stumbled toward me, ripping the tape off his mouth. I expected anger, blame. Instead, he wrapped his arms around me and held on like I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "You saved me," he said, his voice hoarse. "You came for me." "You're my brother," I said simply. The trial happened 6 months later. There was no defendant, but there were testimonies, evidence, a comprehensive examination of everything that had happened. Marcus Thorne was arrested and charged as an accessory for his role in the original corporate espionage that had set everything in motion. Julian had to testify about his choices, his cover-up, his failure to do the right thing. It nearly destroyed his reputation. Stock prices plummeted. Shareholders called for his resignation. But something interesting happened. I testified too. I stood in that courtroom and told my story, not the sanitized version the PR team wanted, but the real story. The poverty, the neglect, the fear, the loneliness, and then I testified about survival, about resilience, about the fact that Julian Davenport had spent 27 years trying to find me, trying to make up for his mistakes by helping other families. I talked about the children found because of the resources he'd poured into missing persons cases. Hundreds of them, kids who'd been taken and were brought home because Davenport Technologies had funded search efforts, developed technology, created databases that law enforcement used every day. "My father made a terrible choice 27 years ago," I said. "He chose his company over justice, and that choice cost us both everything. But he spent every day since trying to make that right. That doesn't erase what happened to me. Nothing can erase that. But it means something. And I'm here today to say that while I can't forget, I've chosen to try to forgive, because that's the only way any of us move forward." The media had a field day. The story had everything: kidnapping, corporate espionage, revenge, redemption. But slowly, the narrative shifted. People started focusing less on Julian's failure and more on the family's resilience. On the daughter who'd survived, on the brother who'd been saved, on the mother who'd never given up hope. The trial concluded with Marcus Thorne, sentenced to 15 years for conspiracy and corporate espionage. Julian was fined but faced no criminal charges. The scandal cost Davenport Technologies billions in market value, but the company survived. And me? I had to figure out who I was now. Not Jenna Riley, the girl who'd been taught she was worthless. Not Arya Davenport, the fairy tale princess returned to her castle. Just me. I started by taking control. I learned everything I could about Davenport Technologies. I sat in on board meetings. I studied the financials. I drove Ethan crazy with questions until he finally admitted I might actually understand business better than he'd expected. "You're relentless," he said one day after I'd grilled him for 2 hours about a potential acquisition. "I learned from the best," I said. "Survival requires relentlessness." "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "When you first showed up, I thought you were going to destroy everything. But you're not. You're making it better. You're making us better." I'd like to say everything was perfect after that, but life doesn't work that way. I still had nightmares. I still had days where I woke up in that beautiful bedroom and felt like an imposter. I still struggled to call Julian dad and Eleanora mom. The words felt foreign in my mouth, but slowly, painfully, we built something real. Not the fantasy family Eleanora had dreamed of, but something more honest, something earned. A year after the trial, I made my move. I called a board meeting at Davenport Technologies and presented a proposal. I wanted to buy Marcus Thorne's old company, which had collapsed after his arrest and was being sold off in bankruptcy proceedings. I wanted to acquire it, restructure it, and turn it into something meaningful. The Arya Foundation, I said, pulling up the presentation I'd worked on for months. A nonprofit dedicated to finding missing children, supporting trafficking victims, and providing resources for families torn apart by crime. We'll use Davenport Technologies' resources, our AI capabilities, our database systems, everything we have, to help bring kids home. Julian studied the numbers. This will cost millions, maybe tens of millions. I'm an heir, right? I have access to my trust fund. I'm using it for this. Arya, Eleanora said softly, "Are you sure? This is your money. You could use it for anything. Travel, a home of your own, investments." "I don't need any of that," I said. "I need this. I need to take what happened to me and make it mean something. I need to help other Jennas, other kids growing up thinking they're not wanted, thinking they're mistakes. I need them to know they matter." Ethan spoke up. "I think it's brilliant, and I want in, not just as a Davenport Technologies partner, but personally. I want to help run it." I looked at him in surprise. We'd gotten closer over the months. but this was unexpected. Really? You saved my life, he said. Let me help you save others. The board approved it unanimously. Within 6 months, the ARIA Foundation was operational. We hired investigators, social workers, therapists. We created a database that law enforcement agencies across the country could access. We funded searches. We brought children home. 3 years later, we'd helped locate over 100 missing kids. 100 families reunited. 100 stories that had a chance at a better ending than mine. I stood in my office one evening, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. It was the same view from Julian's office a few floors up, but this one was mine. Earned, not given. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Dinner tonight? Mom's making lasagna and she's going to be offended if you don't show up. I smiled. Mom. The word still felt strange, but less so every day. Another text, this one from Agent Chen. Another recovery. 9-year-old girl, missing for 2 years. Your database made the match. She's going home. Thank you. I sat down at my desk, pulled out a journal I'd been keeping. My therapist's idea. Write down the wins, she'd said. Write down the moments that matter. Today's entry, 3 years ago, I was Jenna Riley, and I believed I was nothing. Today, I'm Aria Davenport, and I know I'm everything I need to be. Not because of money or family or some fantasy about who I was supposed to be, but because I chose to take the worst thing that ever happened to me and turn it into something that could help others. Because I learned that survival isn't just about staying alive, it's about deciding that your pain doesn't define you. Your choices do. I closed the journal and looked at the photo on my desk. It wasn't the baby picture from my old nursery. It was a photo from last month, taken at the Foundation's anniversary gala. Me, Julian, Eleonora, and Ethan all dressed up, all smiling. A family, not perfect, not without scars, but real. And for the first time in my life, I looked at that photo and felt like I belonged. Your value isn't determined by how others treat you. It's determined by how you choose to treat yourself after they've shown you who they are. I spent 27 years believing I was a mistake because one man's revenge told me so. But I was never the mistake. The people who failed to love me, who used me, who hurt me, they made mistakes. I was just the survivor. So here's my question for you. Have you ever felt like you had to earn love, like you weren't enough just as you are? Have you ever stayed in a situation that was destroying you because you couldn't imagine anything better? If so, what was the moment you finally chose yourself? Drop your story in the comments. Your experience matters. Your voice matters. You matter. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you feel less alone or gave you hope that you can rewrite your own narrative, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories about survival, resilience, and the messy, beautiful process of becoming who you're meant to be. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they're not a mistake. They're a miracle in progress. Remember, your story isn't over. You're still writing it. Make it count.